Welcome back to the deep dive. If you live somewhere that's growing really fast, like Florida, you know the feeling, right?
Oh, yeah. That constant push and pull.
Exactly. Between, building out and trying to keep what makes the place special, you see it everywhere. Roads are packed, water systems are stressed. Those green spaces seem to shrink every year.
It's a huge challenge.
And communities, they usually rely on these things called comprehensive plans.
Right, the local blueprints for growth.
Yeah, these massive, really detailed documents. Local governments, they spend years putting these together, trying to manage future growth, figure out density, what infrastructure they'll need.
Environmental rules, all that stuff.
But what our sources are showing is there's this huge shift happening right now, like a political earthquake almost.
Yeah.
A new state law seems to have just yanked away the local power to draw up those blueprints.
And that's exactly what we're digging into today. Our goal here is to really unpack how this centralization of power is playing out. We're zeroing in on a pattern we're seeing from the Florida Department of Commerce, specifically how they rejected St. Johns County's comprehensive plan. And look, this isn't just some bureaucratic hiccup.
Doesn't sound like it.
No, it seems to be part of a systematic freeze on local control across the state. And it's kicking off these huge legal fights over basically the right to self-govern.
Okay, let's get right into that. Because if the state is just overriding years of local planning work like that, they must have a pretty powerful tool they're using. What is it? How are they actually invalidating these local plans?
It all comes down to one law, Senate Bill 180. SB 180. And the key thing, the piece you really need to grasp right away is that this law looks a lot like a classic bait and switch.
Okay, bait and switch. That lines up with the source material.
Right.
SB 180, it became law June 2025.
Yeah.
But the official title is actually, kind of surprisingly, an act relating to emergencies.
Exactly. Emergencies. And that title is, well, let's just say it's misleading. Some might argue deliberately so. Because while it kind of uses emergency preparedness as a justification, the real punch, the core impact, it doesn't really have much to do with day-to-day crisis management.
Right.
The law has these really broad sections that basically forbid local governments from adopting any changes to their comprehensive plans or their land development rules if those changes are considered more restrictive or burdensome.
More restrictive or burdensome. Okay, that sounds like code. Like, don't you dare make developers follow any tougher rules than they already do?
That's pretty much the interpretation, yes.
Yeah.
The state has basically put a freeze on new regulations for development, not stopping building, but stopping stricter rules.
And for how long?
This freeze is set to last until October 1st, 2027. So we're talking potentially years where local governments feel paralyzed.
Years.
But here's the part that really ups the ante, the part that changed everything, the timeline. This law applies retroactively.
Retroactively?
Yes. To any comprehensive plan, changes adopted after August 1st, 2024. Think about that.
So wait, plans that communities spent years working on, maybe they were almost done.
Exactly. Maybe they were just about to finalize them. Maybe they wanted to add, say, stricter protections for wetlands, or maybe raise impact fees to help pay for new schools because classrooms are overflowing.
And suddenly, boom, if they adopted it after August 2024, this new law could invalidate it.
That's the power it gives the state, yes, because those changing would likely be seen as more restrictive.
And the sources we looked at show the state tries to hang this whole thing on federal disaster declarations, right? For Hurricanes Debbie, Helene, and Milton.
They do cite those declarations, but the legal analysis we've seen suggests that connection is, well, pretty flimsy.
Like a pretext.
It certainly looks like it could be interpreted that way, a cover story perhaps for a much broader goal, stopping local governments from tightening regulations statewide.
So the hurricane connection feels like a justification, but the effect is statewide.
That's the consensus from the analysis, yes. The scope is effectively statewide. So the bottom line for you, the listener, is pretty stark. For the next few years, local governments are essentially frozen.
Frozen?
They can't easily strengthen environmental rules. They can't easily raise fees to make sure growth pays for itself, like for schools or roads. They can't really adapt their regulations to the growth pressures they're facing right now.
So population booming, traffic jams getting worse. But local leaders can't say to a developer, okay, you need to contribute more for road upgrades, or maybe we need slightly fewer houses per acre here. They're stuck with last year's rules.
That's the practical reality created by SB 180, which, naturally leads to the next question. Who's actually enforcing this? Who holds this new centralized power?
Right, and that would be the Florida Department of Commerce. They're the state agency that has to review and sign off on every single local comprehensive plan in Florida.
And the evidence suggests they are taking a very firm line, very systematic. They're quickly establishing precedents that show just how broadly they're reading that more restrictive or burdensome language.
Let's walk through that pattern then, because there are a couple of key examples, even before we dive deep into St. Johns County, that really show this centralization in action.
Okay, good idea. Look at the city of Ocoee. Small city. They submitted their plan called Envision 2045.
Right.
The Department of Commerce didn't just send it back with notes. They declared the whole thing null and void. Outright rejected.
Null and void, just like that.
Just like that. The stated reason. It was deemed more restrictive and burdensome under SB 180. So now Ocoee, they have no choice, really. They have to fight this through the state's own administrative hearings process.
Just to get back the authority to plan their own future.
Essentially, yes. And then you have Orange County, much bigger place, obviously.
Huge growth there.
Exactly. And they faced almost the same thing with their Vision 2050 plan. The department basically said, nope, your local plan to manage growth is unacceptable under the new law.
And that pushed Orange County to join a big lawsuit against the state.
Yeah, immediately. They joined this coalition lawsuit, which really underscores, this isn't just one or two isolated cases. It feels systematic, like a deliberate state takeover of local planning decisions.
Which brings us to St. Johns County. And this one is really interesting, like you said, because it perfectly highlights how that retroactive clause works, or maybe how harsh it is.
It really does. St. Johns County's plan, it had been in the works for years, since 2019.
Wow, long time.
A massive effort. Community meetings, studies, drafting. It was moving through all the required steps. And then overnight, the rules just completely changed underneath them.
So they did all that work, got public input, wrote their plan based on the law as it was, and then the state passes SB 180 in June 2025, and it reaches back in time to August 2024 to penalize any effort they made to strengthen controls.
That's precisely what happened. And the outcome, frankly, was pretty predictable given the department's stance with Ocoee and Orange County.
They rejected it.
Formally rejected, again, for being too restrictive. And our sources confirm this was exactly what the county's own lawyers had been warning the county commissioners about for months.
They saw it coming.
They saw the writing on the wall. They recognized this law seemed designed to catch and kill any local efforts to put stronger land use rules in place.
Okay, so the pattern seems clear. Small city like Ocoee, big county like Orange, fast-growing county like St. John's. If any local government tries to manage growth by making the rules even slightly stricter,
the state, through the Department of Commerce, steps in using this more restrictive or burdensome standard from SB 180 and says, no, you can't do that.
it's like the state has disabled the local thermostat for growth.
That's a good way to put it. They've essentially taken away the local ability to respond to the very real, on-the-ground impacts of all that growth.
Which is, a huge concentration of power at the state level.
Yeah.
But like you said, that kind of move doesn't go unchallenged.
Absolutely not.
Our sources are clear. There's major legal pushback. This coalition, over 20 cities and counties now?
Yeah.
They're suing the state over SB 180. So what's the legal argument? How are they fighting this? Because this feels like it goes right to the core of government power.
It absolutely does. They're challenging the law itself, its constitutionality. And groups like 1,000 Friends of Florida who focus on growth management, they're highlighting two main constitutional problems.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is fundamental. It's about violation of home rule powers.
Home rule. Okay, explain that.
So home rule is basically the principle written right into the Florida Constitution that gives cities and counties the power to govern their own local affairs. Things like zoning, land use planning, local policing.
The power to run their own shop, basically.
Pretty much. And the argument here is that SB 180 is just a massive overreach by the state, stepping directly on those local powers. Think about what that means for you listening.
Right.
This fight determines who gets the final say on how many houses go up next door, whether that patch of woods gets saved, whether the developer has to pay enough to cover the cost of the new school your kid might need because of that development.
So stripping home rule means Tallahassee makes those calls, not your local elected officials.
That's the core of the concern, yes. Transferring that local decision-making power upwards.
Okay, that's a big one. What's the second legal argument? You said it was more technical.
It is, but it's fascinating because it speaks to how the law was perhaps put together. It's the violation of the single subject rule.
Single subject rule.
Yeah, the Florida Constitution specifically says that every law passed by the legislature has to stick to just one single subject. You can't bundle unrelated things together into one bill.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
Prevents log rolling and hiding things.
Exactly. And the critics argue SB 180 blows right past that rule because it takes emergencies, that's the title, the supposed subject, and bundles it with these incredibly broad, long-lasting restrictions on local land use planning. They're completely different topics.
So the argument is the state used the emergency declarations, which people tend not to scrutinize as much.
Right. Emergency powers often get a faster track.
They use that as a kind of legislative Trojan horse to sneak through this huge change that developers might have wanted, reducing local regulations.
That's precisely the implication of the legal challenge, that the emergency justification was a convenient vehicle to achieve a long-standing goal, weakening local control over development.
Wow, okay. So let's synthesize this for someone living through this growth. We have a state law, SB 180. It effectively stops local communities from tightening rules on development for years.
Right, using that more restrictive standard.
And that law itself might be built on shaky constitutional ground, both because it seems to violate local home rule powers and because it might improperly combine emergencies with land use regulation.
That's the heart of the legal battle, yes. The rejections we've seen in St. John's, Ocoee, Orange County, they really throw this fundamental tension into sharp relief. It's managing growth versus essentially maximizing the speed of development.
And under SB 180, the state seems to be saying speed wins.
The practical effect is the state telling local communities, you must keep growing, but you absolutely cannot make that growth any more difficult or expensive for developers than it was back in mid-2024.
This isn't just about zoning fights then. It feels like a really fundamental battle over who controls the future shape of communities, especially in these fast-growing places, and maybe even about environmental protection.
Absolutely. The whole idea of local planning, of a community deciding its own future, really hangs in the balance with these lawsuits.
So for you listening, think about the weight of this. If the courts uphold SB 180, if they agree the state can use an emergency hook to freeze local rules for years, what does that really mean?
What does it mean for your community's ability to handle traffic, protect natural areas, ensure schools aren't overcrowded?
Who should have the final say on that blueprint for where you live? Your local council or state officials hundreds of miles away? That's definitely a question we're thinking about and one we'll be keeping a close eye on.